I am your co-host, Pasta Jardula.
And I'm Fiorella.
And today we have a great guest in the studio. She's one of our favorites since we've started this. She was really an inspiration, and I'm so glad that she's in the studio with us here today. Lawrence Steiner's here, ladies and gentlemen, from the Robust Opposition.
That's right.
Thank you guys so much for having me on. I really love your show.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're a big inspiration to us. You've been doing this for a long time. I like to point out that you don't have to do this, that you have a desire to do this, and it gives me and the fam a lot of energy and fuel to get it going. So let's get the ball rolling. Let's jump into this today because I have a lot of questions, and I'm glad you're here in the studio. Maybe you can shed some light on the situation. I want to start off with talking about what the California progressives really got after this election, which was ugats, squadouche. And I know you're from the East Coast, so you know these words. Nothing, because we have a man by the name of Eric Bauman in charge. You have a history with him. He's just the tip of the iceberg over here. The Kimberly Ellis situation, you had a lot of light into that. You were covering that. I have argued, from what we've talked about, that that was not a fair election. Superdelegates are not within California. They pulled some of the votes. Can you give us a little insight to what went on there? Because I want to kind of digress back to that situation when, after the election of 2016, we had a chance to get progressive. You called Kimberly Ellis the
activist candidate for state party.
You called her the electoral activist.
Yeah.
You also called her the Keith Ellison of California, you mentioned.
Well, let me just say, to be totally honest, I think what I was doing then was a little, I'm not going to use the term putting lipstick on a pig, because Kimberly Ellis is not a pig, but I definitely was framing that to our favor.
Yes.
Kimberly Ellis was the head of Emerge, which is an organization that trains women to run for office. She was a Hillary supporter. So she was never a burner. She was never really an activist, but Eric Bauman was so bad that I wanted to make her into an activist to present the contrast between her and him. He is what we call an old-style party boss. You know, they talked about in the DNC leaks how they could make the decisions in a smoke-filled back room. He would be the kind of person in that smoke-filled back room, and that's the kind of decisions that he made in terms of when he ran the LA County Democratic Party. And I probably wouldn't have activated for Kimberly Ellis as much as I did had I not had a negative encounter with Eric Bauman. And that was at a Bernie-Hillary debate watch party in November of 2016, or I should say 2015, in which he bullied me. He literally got up from around the table after being very aggressive with me verbally, and he pointed his finger in my chest and cursed me out, and to the extent where my friend, a Bernie person who was with me, had to put his hand in between us. And Bauman says, I wasn't going to hit her, but, you know, that's his body posture, and his verbal remarks made it sound like he was going to.
But despite his differences, I just also want to point out that you would also do some reporting that he was taking over $12,500 a month from, you know, the farmers from Big Pharma.
Right.
Which also made him, once again, the establishment, status quo, blue dog, whatever you want to call Democrat.
Right. And I asked him about that. At the e-board meeting that was in San Diego in December of 2016, I asked him about that. And he said, I have to make a living. I mean, he literally said that with no shame. He was making a living. He was the chief of staff of the Speaker of the House, and he was making a living that way. So in addition to his salary, and then he said, well, he never really lobbied Democratic Party officials. Well, what was he taking the money for then, you know?
Yeah.
He was taking the money to lobby against, you know, Prop 61, which Bernie came to California to hold rallies for. And that proposition, as we know, went down in flames.
Yes, it did.
And we know that Big Pharma has a lot of sway. I will just tell a personal anecdote. My son had a viral infection. The first line of antibiotics didn't work. He is now on a drug by Merck that is literally $175 a pill. Fortunately, we have insurance, but if we didn't have insurance, it would cost me $3,500 to buy 20 pills that he needs to kick this viral infection.
Every month? Is
that no, just for the course of the treatment.
Okay.
Yeah. But, you know, people are dying from not having health insurance. People are cutting their pills in half. and this is what we're fighting for. So for Eric Bauman to call himself a progressive and to take money from Big Pharma, which has more money than God. I mean, Bernie basically went one of those rallies that I went to in Hollywood. I didn't realize until he said that they spend the most money lobbying in D.C., Big Pharma. I didn't realize that. I thought it might be Big Oil, but he said no, it was Big Pharma.
Really?
So, yeah.
He is also, you won't know this, fam, because you're a little bit young, but me and Mrs. Steiner, you remember Bowser from Sha Na Na?
Yeah.
That's Eric Bauman is the nephew to Bowser from Sha Na Na. Did you know that?
The real nephew?
The real nephew.
No, I didn't know that.
From Sha Na Na. So I thought that was kind of cool as well and stuff. And I think it's no surprise that, Bauman, who was a Big Pharma lobbyist, whatnot, Anthony Rendon, there's still no single payer here in California. Yeah. There is no surprise when that is your head of your DNC. Fam, you got anything to jump on this here?
No. I mean, you guys pretty much said it all. I mean, I have very little respect for Eric Bauman, and I feel like he is trying to infiltrate the progressive movement within the California Democratic Party. I think he's using his contacts to try to get more progressive support. I feel like overall, nationally, we did get some wins. However, within the California Democratic Party, it is extremely difficult to get progressives in there. There's always, I feel like, a co-opt happening within the progressive movement. And in the end, we come out with the same type of establishment corporate candidates. And the only two victories I was happy to celebrate were Alex Villanueva and
Tony Thurman,
and Tony Thurman. Yes.
Yeah, me too. I think those were the only two ones
that we had. Right?
Yeah.
Do we get anything else?
Well, I don't know. Katie Porter still may prove herself to be a progressive. I mean, she is for Medicare for all. She did work with Elizabeth Warren and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and I'm very skeptical about Katie Hill. And
what makes you skeptical of Porter, though, before you get to Hill? Because I remember before that, when I came to you, I said, Katie Porter, what is she all about? You said, I don't know. I'm having a feeling. I don't think she's progressive enough.
Well, I'll tell you, because Octavia Tui, who you know from Orange County, implied that she worked because she worked for Kamala Harris, and Kamala Harris did not prosecute Steve Mnuchin. But I think that, looking back on that, it sounds more like a guilt by association thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't really know that it was Katie Porter's job exactly in that prosecution. I mean, that was a clear case. For people who don't know, I call her Counterfeit Kamala with a K, because I think she's a fake and a fraud and a phony.
Oh, she is.
And she basically...
The Stacey Abrams money thing was ridiculous. You saw that, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
She was actually just, pillaging money from Stacey Abrams, using Stacey Abrams and then taking half of that money.
Right.
That was ridiculous.
Yeah, right. But more importantly, she did not prosecute Steve Mnuchin, who was head of One West Bank, because he fraudulently foreclosed on millions of Californians. Her office recommended that she prosecute, and she did not prosecute him because she had taken money from him when she was running for Attorney General. Absolutely. And after she didn't prosecute him, he contributed money to her Senate race. Yeah. So, yeah.
Right.
One hand washes the other. Florida and California has got that same thing where Republicans and Democrats seem to be working together behind the scenes. But back to that Bauman race, did you think there was some phony play when they did the recount? Because when we were waiting for the results, we were anticipating a Kimberly Ellis win. And on the release statement that Bauman put on the DNC website, it was pretty much said that the audit found both Bauman and Kimberly Ellis had votes that were invalidated. But it doesn't tell you how many were invalidated.
Well, I think that he brought in people to vote. He twisted arms to vote. I don't know that there was so much illegal stuff going on as there was him just using his bully tactics to try to bring people in to vote for him. So I can't say I was not part of that audit. I was not part of that recount. I know that she closed it. But there's also been some criticism for people who worked on her campaign that they thought they had it in the bag. I know when I talked to Joe Macaluso, I was in Portland, Oregon, right prior to that convention, And he basically told me, oh, we have it. And I think that they rested on their laurels a little bit. They didn't do their whipping enough. Certain people that were whipping, like Cody Pedersen, who was whipping in the San Diego area, you know, when I saw him there at that convention, he was really focused. He was really on point, making sure all his people voted. I don't know that all of her whips did as good of a job because they thought she had it in the bag.
They rested. They got a little bit comfortable.
Yeah, they did. And I know that there was one woman who I interviewed at her launch in Los Angeles at Masmalo, who didn't even bother to vote for her. I mean, this was a Kimberly Ellis delegate who did not cast a vote, and there were several people like this. Wow. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, who votes for these things? It's all the delegates.
Yeah,
right?
the delegates.
So okay.
And there are super delegates, too. I mean, they don't call them super delegates, but they are the elected officials. Because you have to remember, the big sweep that we got, the 600 progressives that we got 2 years ago next month, were only the elected delegates. That's 1/3 of all the delegates. The other third is the Central Committee people.
Yes.
And then the final third are elected officials.
So who's the Central Committee? I think the elected officials are part of, they're like the super delegates of sorts.
Yeah.
You have the elected delegates, which everybody's getting ready for now. What's the Central Committee? Where does that come from?
Well, those are people who are also elected, too, but they're elected by the delegates themselves.
Okay.
So... yeah. So
how many total delegates are there? And when is the next race? Is the next race now in 2019?
I think it's in January.
For the new chair?
No.
For the delegates.
For the delegates.
Yeah.
When does the chair run again?
I don't know.
I got it. It's 2019. Okay. Do you have anybody in mind who you think should run for that position in California? You're an insider.
No, because I'm exited. I'm not even in the Democratic Party. I don't really care who runs.
Neither am I right now, technically. I mean, I don't know, but you don't care? So
no, because look, I'm from Occupy, and in Occupy we had an expression, diversity of tactics. So I support anyone who's trying to take over the Democratic Party, anyone who's trying to start the People's Party. I support people who are working on the outside with social movements. I support it all, a diversity of tactics. But I'm not involving myself with the Democratic Party. I'm on the steering committee of the California Progressive Alliance, which I have a great hope for. And I can talk about that if you want to spend a couple minutes on that. Because that's Gail McLaughlin's effort, and we're going to have our founding convention in the end of March in San Luis Obispo.
It's important.
Yeah.
Because right now we can't have just anybody just jumping into the ring at any point, whatnot, and just trying to run. I think there has to be some type of alliance and committee that can put forth the right candidates this time out.
Well, what we're working on, it's post-partisan. In other words, so it's not just Democrats. It's Greens. It's no party preference. Mm-hmm. I mean, even if there's progressive Republicans that want to join us. But it's corporate-free. And one of the programs, Gail's calling it, that I called it Adopt a Legislator, but I guess that's just her handy term for it, was an idea that I had. I had a couple of conference calls after the election in 2016 trying to start a Bernie-crat organization. And what ended up happening was Karen Bernal and the Progressive Caucus of the Democratic Party sort of waylaid what we were talking about on those calls all into the Kimberly Ellis election. Because I wanted to have a retreat in San Luis Obispo in March of 2017 to talk about this Bernie-crat organization. And what we would do is we would have a platform, and we would get candidates to endorse our platform. If they didn't endorse it, and I was thinking specifically of Gavin Newsom, we wouldn't give them our endorsement. If we couldn't find candidates to endorse, we would run candidates. We would have a citizens' ALEC, whereby we would write progressive legislation, sort of like the nurses wrote SB 562, and we would present it to progressive legislators to introduce. And now this Adopt a Legislative program is coming out of my extensive criticism of the California Democratic Party Progressive Caucus for not being involved in legislation, for not alerting us to legislation. What happened is, since I've been doing my show for 2 years, in August of 2017 and August of 2018, I find out about these horrific bills that have sailed through the legislature that nobody's alerted us to. And I'm trying to do shows at the last minute, trying to stop them from getting passed when it's really kind of too late. So what we're talking about, and I'm going to be working on this with David Hildebrand, he's agreed to take this on, is following legislation and getting people in the California Progressive Alliance to adopt a legislator so that we will have ongoing relationships with, like in my case, it would be Richard Bloom, who's my state assemblyman. I already know a couple of his people, or Ben Allen, who's my state senator. So everybody in the alliance would have a legislator, either the legislator, the member themselves, or if not, the deputy, the district deputy. We would have an ongoing relationship in which we would be lobbying them about bills that we wanted them to support and bills that we wanted them to oppose, so that we could either get these things out of committee or kill them in committee before it was too late. And then there's also the component about reaching out to the community and having listening tours so that we could educate the public about what's going on, such that if we needed them to then reinforce our message by flooding Richard Bloom or Ben Allen's office with calls, we could then deploy the public. So that's kind of what we want, the California Progressive Alliance to be. And I have a lot of hope for that, because for many years now, since I became politically reactive, I should say, or reactivated politically, I've said that the problem with progressives is we're all in our silos. We're all either in our identity silo or we're in our issue silo. And we need to work together. So that's what I think this Progressive Alliance is going to do. So the racial justice people can help the environmentalists, and the people fighting charter schools can help the housing people. And everybody gets out of their silos, and we become a big force, and we stop infighting.
Right, because the organizing with the progressive movement is a problem. There's really little leadership and organization, and it becomes a very easy situation for other people like the establishment to come in and manipulate and thwart us one way or the other. So I really am hopeful for this Progressive Alliance, because from the moment she started talking about it, I was like, this is what we need. That way we aren't wasting time arguing online on why you're so dumb for being Dem enter or why you're so dumb for being Dem exit, which is exactly what's happening right now, and exactly why we need to all support Gail and the Progressive Alliance. So thank you for bringing that up. I wanted to kind of move forward with Pelosi. So Pelosi is everywhere, right? And there is a lot of back and forth going on between Pelosi and the progressives, as you know. It's online, it's everywhere, it's on social media. And just the other day, we saw this from a soon-to-be Congresswoman, Katie Hill. So let's go back to Katie Hill. Katie Hill didn't just say she was going to vote for Pelosi. She tagged Mike Levin in a tweet and said, Mike Levin and I agree that our ability to deliver on the promises we made to our constituents depends on leadership that is bold, pragmatic, and capable of swift results. This is why we support Nancy Pelosi for Speaker and urge our fellow freshmen to do the same. That, to me, is it's just backtracking on a lot of the people who got her elected. She got a lot of progressive support, Katie Hill did. And she could have just said, hey, I'm going to endorse Nancy Pelosi, or she could have said anything, or she could have said nothing. But she's calling for every freshman to endorse Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi is one of the most disliked women behind Hillary Clinton and Dianne Feinstein. And I do agree that some of the insults to her are because she is a strong woman in the Democratic Party, but I think the majority of that is just based on her inaction and her voting record and her stance on certain policies. And I don't consider her a friend to the progressive movement, and I know many people don't either. So I just want your take on this, because I know you have a completely different take on some of this.
Yeah, this is surprising, so listen up.
Okay, well, first of all, I agree with you about Katie Hill and Mike Levin, and the first thing that I did when I saw that tweet was I retweeted it with the comment, this is why they never fooled me, because they both said that they would support single-payer health care. Nancy Pelosi has clearly said that she's not going to put single-payer health care, Medicare for all, on the Democratic agenda for 2018, even though 85% of Democrats want it and 52% of Republicans want it. So 70% altogether of the American people want to see single-payer. So why isn't she putting it on the agenda? One can only assume it's because of the big money from the big pharma and the insurance companies that we've just talked about. However, I have a more nuanced view of Nancy Pelosi. One, she is a San Francisco liberal. This was the word we used before the word progressive. And now we make a distinction between liberal and progressive. So, you know, when she says she was talking about single payer 20 years ago, it's true. But she is also pragmatic. So as far as those three words, bold, pragmatic, and what was the third one? Swift?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I will give her pragmatic. I don't know that she's bold, and I certainly don't think this is swift, because this takes a lot of work, what she does. And I want to read a couple of quotes that I've just pulled up to be on this show. And one is relating to the role of a speaker versus the role of a president. And this was from an article that was just published in The Atlantic. I forget the author, but it was about Nancy Pelosi's historic quest to be... first of all, she is the most powerful woman in American politics ever. And we have to give her credit for that. She came up through the ranks very similar to a Bauman. She was a fundraiser. She was the head of the state party. So this is what she knows how to do. She was not a policy person. She was not an activist. And then she became a representative, and then she became historically the first female speaker in 2008 when Obama took control. So this article is about her quest to become the speaker for a second time. And this author says, to a greater degree than presidential candidates, congressional leaders have their public image defined by their political opponents. Their job is less to inspire than to govern, to translate lofty promises into tough compromises. And that's what I want to speak to, because I was following Pelosi 10 years ago when, you know, first when she was the minority leader and Bush was the president, and then when she became the speaker when Obama became the president. And she passed some really good environmental legislation. She passed an energy bill that had not been passed in decades to raise the fuel economy standards to 35 miles per gallon by 2020, and also to put some money into renewable energy. Now, it also put money into ethanol, which we know is a big boondoggle for, you know, corn farmers, and not really the kind of energy that we should be using. But this article that I believe you could put up on the screen from June of 2007, this is before even Obama won, okay? And it talks about House Democrats at odds over energy bill provisions. And I happen to be in Washington, D.C., watching this historic legislation get signed 10 years ago in 2008. And it basically says, before the July 4th deadline, she said, for coming up with an energy independence package of legislation, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, well, wait a minute. So she was Speaker in 2007. So we had the majority in the last term of Bush, I guess, is trying to pull together the pieces of an energy bill from 10 committees and warring Democratic leaders. So you have to understand that there was John Dingell, who was House Energy and Commerce Committee chairman, and he's from Michigan, which is a car state. And the car manufacturers did not want these low mileage standards. He was trying to keep it out of this package and saying, let's go for a comprehensive climate change legislation next year. And then there was Joe Lieberman, who was chairman of the Subcommittee on Environmental and Public Works, who was working with the ranking Republican Senator John Warner. And they wanted to put a ceiling on greenhouse gas emissions and allow companies to trade allowances. So in other words, that was the beginning of cap and trade, which is what Wall Street wants for energy. You know, that's how they want to deal with it. And then there was, Edward Markey, who was the chairman of the Select Committee on Energy Independence and Global Warming. And they said his committee cannot draw up legislation, so he needs Dingell's cooperation for a climate change bill. Yeah. So the point of all this is to say that it is one thing for a president like, or a candidate like Obama or like Bernie when they're campaigning to say we must have, the most comprehensive package to address climate change. We must have single-payer health care. We must have a $20 minimum wage, if you will, to get it up to inflation. But the fact is that once you are the speaker and you have 400, well, you have how many? 400 altogether in Congress?
Yeah.
And so half of those are Democrats pretty much. And all those different committees and all those different states with the different interests. You've got the West Virginia coal people.
Okay.
You've got the agriculture. You see, what I'm saying is you're not going to be able to get anything bold. What you're going to be able to get is a compromise. And I feel like what she was able to get in 2008 was pretty damn good. And similarly, a lot of people are giving her credit for Obamacare. They're basically saying that she revived that from the dead, saving Obamacare. Now, we all know as activists and as patients that we need single-payer health care, but Obamacare has really helped a lot of people, and we cannot deny. So I'm putting on my incrementalist hat here, basically to say that, that she, okay. So what I feel like AOC is doing, which is very smart, is she's holding out, this is what Katie Hill should have done. This is what Mike Levin should have done. Maybe this is even what Pramila Jayapal and Iram, what's her name?
Imar Omar.
Yes, those two already endorsed Pelosi. They need to hold out for Nancy Pelosi to at least say, and even what AOC is asking for, this select committee to address climate change, Nancy Pelosi started one in 2000.
Yeah. Well, let's Fam, do you have something to say about that real quick, or do you want to?
You can start.
Well, I was just going to say, I understand what you're saying, and I know, and I'm not saying that you're cherry picking certain legislation that she's done, but I don't think there's anything pragmatic about what the Democratic Party has done over the last decade. We keep going back, losing seats. Everybody's everyday lives economically has been shot to shit, you know what I'm saying? And they're really, let's be honest, there's no legislation that's getting through the House. It might get through the House now, but it ain't getting through the Senate. It ain't getting through this president. No progressive legislation is going to change. This is about changing the party as a whole and representing the people. Okay? And we've seen Nancy Pelosi from time to time, telling young kids who say they want to go in a more social direction, her laughing at them. The woman has become a millionaire since her time in office, whatnot. And if there's anything that we needed to do, we needed to hold the line and get a new speaker and a new direction forward. She has an approval rating of 26%. That's not going to help the Democrats come election time in 2020. If anything, it's going to hinder us. It's going to hurt the left. Because I know we're not really Democrats, we say. We're just on the left, okay? The thing that bothers me the most, and we talked about this too, and we should kind of point out that, because I know you pointed out some legislation. Hey, Hillary Clinton was one of the first to push, single-payer universal health care out there back in the days, when she was the first lady. But things change, and Nancy Pelosi has changed completely. She's drifted to the right her whole time in office. But the thing that is most disturbing is that nobody is stepping up to her left.
Right.
However, I don't care, and I'm not fearful of somebody to her right. I'm wanting of somebody more honest.
And I think it's a manipulation by the establishment and by her own powerful ability. Because why is no one, out of the 16 Democrats who oppose her, why is no one stepping up to her left? Why is no one to her left actually running? And that tells you something.
It does.
It tells you a lot.
It tells you a lot that
you say that nobody wants the position.
Yeah, look, everybody. Look,
you don't think it's a strong arm move?
No,
I think it's a strong arm move.
Mike Figueredo from the Humanist Report said...
Figsy, we call him here.
Yeah?
In this place.
Yeah, I like him a lot.
I like him a lot, too.
And he has a petition on change.org that Barbara Lee should do it. But Barbara Lee doesn't want to do it. Now, right. Barbara Lee is a very principled person. As you know, she's the only person who voted against the Iraq War in the Congress.
The AUMF. Yes.
Right. But she is not... She is not as strong as in terms of whipping votes and strong-arming people. I mean, Nancy Pelosi is kind of like Eric Bauman in that way. She's like an old-style party boss. And quite frankly, I guess maybe I'm more accepting of that in a woman than I am in a man, because I'm like, you go, girl,
Right.
Why should it just be men that can be strong and be admired for being strong?
But what does that mean? What does it mean she's a strong, we need a strong, woman.
Well, you need a strong person in order to whip. I mean, look, here's the thing. Why I would never be in Congress, and maybe why you guys would never be in Congress, because we are principled activists, and we want to take the ideal position, what we want to shoot for. That's where we start. And we always say, or at least I always say, I'm going to ask for this. Let the politicians compromise. This is what we hated about Obama. He came in compromising. He was like Charlie Brown and Lucy with the football.
Yeah.
As soon as, he came over to where the Republicans were, they would move the football even further to the right. To the point where I used to say, they voted, Obamacare was Bob Dole's position. It was a Republican program cooked up by the Heritage Foundation, implemented by Governor Mitt Romney, and proposed in the federally by Bob Dole. So he thought he would give that to them, just like he thought he would give them Merrick Garland, who was Orrin Hatch's choice. Orrin Hatch is as right-wing Republican senator as you can get, but just because it was Obama. He didn't pay attention to Mitch McConnell, who said, we are not going to give Obama anything. So the first quote that I read, the president, he should have been out there advocating for the most progressive positions. But the problem was Obama was not a progressive. He fooled everybody.
Yeah, and neither is Nancy Pelosi. Has nothing progressive about her in my mind. And when we say strong, I want somebody to be strong on their convictions. I want somebody to stand up strong for no war, stand up strong for a Green New Deal, stand up strong for those things. I don't care how tough she is with her bullshit platitudes, to be perfectly honest.
Exactly. I just feel like it's time for new leadership in the sense of how we've been operating our Congress for the longest time. We've been operating under the notion that a politician has to be ruthless, that a politician has to be pragmatic and cunning, and all of these adjectives that we're just using to describe. And obviously it hasn't worked, because we're here at this point with Donald Trump as president. And we are still seeing that the Democratic Party and some of the left are pushing establishment candidates like Kamala Harris, like Biden, and possibly Hillary Clinton all over again.
And Beto O'Rourke now.
That's another thing we'll discuss later. But to me, it's like I'm done with these adjectives of describing someone that's supposed to be a certain way. And I think we need Congresspeople like Ocasio-Cortez and even more radical than her in there, who aren't afraid to be like, no, I'm sorry, I don't support Nancy Pelosi. Because even Ocasio's response wasn't good enough for me. And I know what she's doing. I respect what she's doing. And I thought she did the best out of all the people that responded. She's saying, out of all the people running, she's the most progressive. So let me go ahead and read this quote that she was making bean soup on Instagram and talking about a lot of the issues, which is awesome and smart, because that directly points to millennials and the younger generation. So she said, my standard in this is I'm going to support the most progressive candidate that's leading the party, and right now that is Nancy Pelosi. In terms of the running, I would like to see new younger leadership, but I don't want a new leadership that's more conservative. And then she also says, I do think that overall in government we need more young people and we need to transform our leadership. But when we say no to Pelosi just for the sake of that, we don't want to put ourselves in a position where we end up with a more conservative leadership.
That's the thing. There's 16 or 17 people that signed that statement saying they're not going to support her, and they're all conservative. I think that we need to exact promises out of Pelosi before we give her endorsement.
Exactly.
Just like I was telling people they needed to exact promises out of Gavin Newsom before they gave him their endorsement. Exactly. I think the nurses thought that he was going to support single payer, and I think they're going to be sadly mistaken.
Of course. 100%.
He already started backtracking from it during the campaign. They had to call him to the woodshed and make him have another statement about it. But, okay, so this is complicated. This is very complicated to get that. So in my mind, again, going back to diversity of tactics, I think we have to keep still pushing for single payer while we do all these other improvements, okay? Yeah. I don't think we do one or the other. So saving Obama, and I'm completely contradicting myself from a year and a half ago when I made a video, I made a live stream about Indivisible, how they were there saving the ACA. Yeah. Well, actually, I'm not contradicting myself, because what I said was, they had an hour-long conference call with the ACLU, with Planned Parenthood, who we know is not for single payer, and they were talking to all of their supporters in the country about how you should call your congressperson and tell them we need to save the ACA. Well, in my mind, if they really supported single payer, they could have added a little sentence that said, listen, we think single payer is the way to go, but right now we have to save the... They could have even... But they didn't even say that. They didn't even throw that bone out because they're basically not for it. So here's the thing. As far as the 1,000 seats, I put that on Obama. Obama, first of all, was the leader of the party. He was the purported leader of the party, not Nancy Pelosi. The Speaker of the House is not the leader of the party. Obama completely dismantled his Organizing for America, which was the largest grassroots mobilization for a presidential campaign ever assembled. He could have kept that group intact to help lobby for the bills in the same way that we're talking about the California Progressive Alliance getting the public to lobby our local legislators. He could have kept that group intact, but he dismantled it. He dismantled Howard Dean's 50-state strategy, and he was all about this cult of personality. And now he's a total corporatist. You know, if you want, we can go on and talk about...
No, I mean, but it's you could give some credit. You can put some blame on Obama, but you have to put a lot of blame on Nancy Pelosi. Do you remember her last year reading the better deal? It's like she didn't even read it. The mergers. I mean, this lady has a 26%
But that's the DNC.
Approval rate.
That's the DNC.
Yeah, but she's the strongest leader within the DNC, the strongest woman. You said so yourself. And once again, when it comes back to this whole progressive caucus that has 77 members in the House, they should have held out. Nancy Pelosi, you won't get anything. The progressive caucus stands still unless you come out for single payer.
I agree with you.
They didn't even do that.
I agree with you.
And once again, we're digressing, and that is the big thing when we see a lot of... And also, Fee has pointed out so many times online, these people are so myopic. It's going to hurt us in 2020. The woman has a 26%, I keep saying it,
and Republicans use her.
But that's because the Republicans have really...
If we change the whole direction...
They use the right points to attack her. I mean, they're using valid points, and that's the problem. When they're using valid points to point out things she's done...
No, they're calling her too liberal, the Republicans.
I know that, but within the liberal term that they're using, they are also putting in her policy issues and her failures. And I just think that I understand, like, we don't want another a more moderate speaker, but I feel like that's a manipulation by the establishment because nobody else to her left is running. So the only people running are more moderate than her. Okay, so why don't we go to those people and say, hey, why don't one of you to the left of her run and you guys will get her out of the House? And if that doesn't happen, you can rescind your endorsement. You don't have to say a thing. But to have progressives out there being like, well, I think she's going to be good because, you know, maybe she'll like promote single payer. She hasn't shown any notion of going to pass or promote in any way, shape or form Medicare for all. Not at all.
Right.
And if I'm a delegate or if I'm someone in the party, I'll be like, okay, Nancy, we will support you. Please support Medicare for all. Write it down, sign the paper, and we will support you for
I
speaker.
agree with
and that's
you.
How you do that.
I don't know why this select committee on climate change is where AOC is drawing the line, the Green New Deal. Because Nancy Pelosi has proven herself to be good on climate change. I don't know why she's not bringing up single payer. I think every single person in that progressive caucus should withhold their endorsement until she agrees to put single payer on the platform.
Yeah, I agree too.
And I think that's kind of like the flow that I'm seeing. That's why that people are holding off on not endorsing her or on endorsing her, because an article in The Atlantic came out and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said that if we pass Medicare for all, I'm going to be silent as a lamb, because that's one way that you can get Medicare for all is the one thing that can unite everybody,
right?
Because everybody wants it pretty much,
right.
and if we can get that passed, people are willing to do a million different things. I obviously think there should be nuance to that. I don't think like it should just be like a one issue thing that we support a candidate on, but I think that's at least the very least that she could do.
I'd shut my mouth. I'd be quiet as a lamb for single payer.
Yeah.
Nancy Pelosi, single payer. Look, give me something. But once again, we're getting nothing. And where is the state of this Democratic Party going right now? I mean, it's just, we're in shambles. We got nothing here. And once again, we're getting fed Nancy Pelosi.
Well, that's big money, and that's corporate contributions. So now let's go back to our losses in California.
Yeah.
We lost because our corporate free candidates didn't have enough money. And let's talk about a very often quoted statement that the only thing that beats money power is people power. There's nobody that had more people power behind her than Jovanka Beckles, but she still lost by 10 percentage points. You know why? Because Buffy Wicks's money power bought people. She was able to hire paid canvassers. So they had what we learned from AOC's victory and Cara Eastman's victory, at least in the primary, and the 2 DSA candidates in Virginia, is the more face-to-face contacts you can have with voters, the better you do. And not just voters, but even non-voters. So that's the best strategy. If you're a corporate-free progressive candidate, you're not going to go after the likely Democratic voters. You're going to go after the unlikely voters, the millennials, poor people,
whatever. Aren't voting right now.
Right, because those likely people are going to go for the establishment person. That's what happened with Hillary, and that was my critique of Bernie Sanders' campaign. He was asked in a CNN interview, if income inequality was your biggest issue, Bernie, how come in 6 of the 7 states where income inequality was the greatest, did Hillary win? And his glib answer was, poor people don't vote. And I was screaming at the TV, well, Bernie, you never went out and tried to get them. At LA for Bernie, I started, wasn't my idea, it was one of our volunteers' idea. It was called the Low Income Outreach Project. And we would go to Walmart and 99-cent store and employment offices. And we would talk about how, oh, you know, you don't vote because there's no candidate that represents you. Well, here's this guy that's going to represent you because for 40 years, all he's cared about is the poor and the working class, you know, people. And that's his campaign had a very standard, like when they came to California a month before the primary, my people were telling me they're giving us these walk lists where they're asking us to skip houses, because we're working off this NPG van list of likely Democratic voters. And they ignored it. They said, we're going to stop at every house, you know?
Yeah.
Because the likely voters are going to go for Hillary.
Yeah.
And they did go for Hillary.
So that's when you see those canvassing sheets, they got the likely voters you're looking at. They're not looking at those other houses that aren't on that list where you can knock on the door and you don't know who's going to answer it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And possibly, I mean, that's going to be, I think the future is going to have to be that. I went out and canvassed a couple days with Alex Villanueva, and I walked with him. And that's why he was the only candidate I voted for, because he was amazing. But we were skipping over a couple houses and stuff that we didn't have information on. And I was thinking to myself, what if we knock on that door? Who knows it's there? Maybe it might be a Trump supporter.
Yeah.
But who knows? Maybe we can talk to them and sway them.
Yeah.
And stuff. But other than the people power, and you talked about it, what about election integrity? I mean, didn't we hear some stuff that there were almost 75? And you put up something about this before, and I was like, no, Lawrence Steiner, I don't believe all the provisional ballots are counted at all.
Okay, well, I got to talk to that. Okay,
because we're talking 2016.
Yeah.
Okay, you're missing at least 1 million votes somewhere. They're gone. They're in the trash. Those were provisional ballots. Right now with Maria Estrada, I think she was reporting, and she put up something that close to some precincts were giving out 75% of the ballots.
Okay, well, there is something that I want to try to investigate, and I'm going to try to investigate it. And that is the vote by mail. Everybody was converted to vote by mail. People who didn't even register to vote by mail would go to vote, and they said, oh, we have you as a vote by mail person. And they would say, but I never got a ballot, or I never requested that, or whatever, right? Well, okay, first of all, you have to figure out behind these conspiracy theories, who's doing the conspiring. Remember, California is a Democratic state. Now, I will tell you from 2016 that provisional ballots is a fail-safe measure to make sure that every ballot is counted. It's not like in Georgia or Alabama or some of these corrupt states where they give black people provisional ballots so that they won't count them. California, it's fail-safe. I have a friend who worked in the data department of the LA County Registrar, and I can go to my private messages. He told me that in 2016, in the largest county in California, which is Los Angeles County, only 1,400 provisional ballots were not counted. And the reason why was those people were not registered to vote. So obviously, if you're not registered to vote, you can't, have your ballot counted. So 85 to 90% historically, and you could see data on this, 85 to 90% of provisional ballots in the state of California are counted. Now, we set up, Lucy Riley and I set up ballots for Bernie. We had ballot monitoring, when they were counting the 2,400,000 ballots that weren't counted on election night, the provisionals and the late-breaking vote by mails, we had teams set up in almost all of the 58 counties monitoring that. And with the exception of San Diego, where that corrupt Michael Vu is down there, and they were whiting out Bernie Sanders' name, and Alameda, where they wouldn't let us get close to watch to see what they were doing, all these other counties were comprised of, because it's not Alex Padilla. He just sets up systems. Alex Padilla, everybody was...
He sets up what?
Systems.
He tries systems intact.
Well, they're very minor. The counties, the registrars of voters in the counties run the elections, okay? So the training is done by them. The monitoring is done by them. Everything is done by them. What's going to happen in Los Angeles County is we're going to voting centers. So instead of having 4,000 precincts with volunteers who are paid very minimally, and they don't even get training, what we found out is only the poll inspector gets the training. The workers don't. They could watch a video online if they choose. Other than that, you know, they're using these machines that are from the 60s. So everybody that was reporting broken machines, A, that's why they're old machines. B, the ballots are not counted, tabulated at the polling place anyway. They're just put into that machine and they're tabulated at the registrar's office. So what happens is if the machine isn't broken, they go into a locked box with a chain of custody that is established and they get counted over there. So it was making me crazy to see all these conspiracy theorists, including some things that Greg Palast said in 2016 about Bernie winning California or Bernie winning San Francisco or any of these crazy things that, you know, were not happening. So I want people to feel like their vote is being counted in California. Now, that's not to say that in Texas and in Georgia and all these
Florida.
yeah, I mean, that's crazy.
But if it's happening in all these other states, you just can't believe that it's happening here, too? Because Greg Palast led some very convincing data on that, and that's his specialty. I mean, and he's doing it in Georgia as well with Stacey Abrams.
But he wasn't monitoring at the polling places the way we were.
Okay. Let me ask you a question, Lauren Steiner.
I mean, at the registrars. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Did you have another question?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. 2016, the primary, Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, versus 2008, Obama versus Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
We had a record number, 2016, of new registered voters 6 weeks before the election, 800,000 new voters. How many more votes should there have been in 2016 compared to 2008 for that primary, in your personal opinion?
Talking about California?
California primary.
Okay, well, all I want to tell you is that I want to recount a story, a conversation that I had with Josh Phillips, who was Bernie Sanders' field director. Okay? I worked with him. I had a meeting of all my LA for Bernie leaders at my house with him, and we talked about how California was going to go. Right when we found out that 2.4 million votes were not counted on election night, and they called it for Hillary by 15 points, I contacted him, and he said, do me a favor. I said, is the Sanders campaign going to be sending in lawyers to monitor the counting over the next month? And he says, I need you to find out something for me. And he says, tell me what percentage of those are provisionals and what percentage of those are absentees. So when I told him the numbers, which I don't remember off the top of my head, he called the people, and then he called me back and he said, no, we're not going to send anyone in because based on the fact that so many of them are absentee, absentees go for Hillary because the early voters, you know, who vote by mail are the likely Democratic voters, the establishment types we were talking about. Most of the provisionals are going to go for Bernie because those are the newly registered people who's got their things screwed up. And students who are voting where they go to college as opposed to where they live and all this kind of stuff. And he said, Bernie's going to close the gap by 7 or 8 points, but he can't win, so we're not going to put any lawyers. And that is exactly what happened. They got it to the exact percentage on how much he closed the gap. So it's like they had election protection people. They knew what, you know, the statistics needed to be. And the fact was, he just didn't run a good campaign here. He came to California. There were only 50 organizers in the whole state. The largest number of delegates, okay, we had 55 elected delegates here in California. He only had 50 campaign workers. They had 100 in New Hampshire, right? They laid off 291 organizers after New York because they were running out of money. They came into California. They only had $6 million in the bank. Politico, I remember reading this article with Tad Devine where they said, are you going to run TV? This is why Mike Sarasso quit, or was fired, actually. Mike Sarasso said, we need to run a field campaign, but Tad Devine, who was making money based on how much TV was bought, said, well, we may just buy a small buy, or we may not make a buy at all. They ended up spending $2 million, which was an ineffectual TV buy in a state as large as California. $2 million is nothing. For that $2 million, they could have hired back those 291 organizers that they fired and fanned them through the entire state of California. So, from my mind, being on the ground for 2 years, I started LA for Bernie before many of the national people were even hired. I started it in May of 2015. Watching the way that campaign went down, not just in California, but in other states, there were so many mistakes that, the campaign itself made, that we can't just blame it on shenanigans. And I will go to my grave, attesting to that.
Yeah, I definitely think that there were a lot of mistakes made. And also, a lot of the criticism he received from people of color that they didn't feel included. And that's something he needs to take onto the road. So I did want to move on. Did you want to move on to your next?
No. I just wanted to point out that I think that, I appreciate the fact that you said there's a lot of mistakes that could be made, but I don't want to ignore also the shenanigans that go on. And there's no way in my mind personally that you can convince me that there were only 18,000 more votes 8 years later in a very big primary in the information age where we had 700,000 new registered voters.
You're talking about 2008?
2008 to 2016. Oh. You're talking about 18,000 more votes. That number just doesn't add up.
I can't. I can't
just
speak intelligently to that.
Yeah, well, that's where I look. I look at those numbers and I'm like, something's not adding up.
Something similar happened to Tim Canova versus Debbie Wasserman Schultz this time around. When we look at those numbers, it doesn't make any sense.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't make any sense.
She resigned finally.
Brenda Snipes.
That's ridiculous. She should have been
fired and prosecuted. Exactly.
100%.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about your favorite person, Lauren. Here we go.
Who, Obama?
No, Donald Trump.
Oh.
So we're going to talk about, you sent us an article you want to talk about when it comes to talking about, and it's an old term that my uncle used to say, you got to call balls and strikes. Regardless of what side you're on the left, you're on the right. And what he means by that analogy, you have to call balls and strikes, is that you have to call it like it is. And we talk about this when it comes to Trump a lot of times because we're around this whole bubble of people that it's all anti-Trump. I think it drove us crazy that a lot of these candidates were nothing more than just anti-Trump. But when Trump does something good, we should praise him for doing something good. When majority time when he does the Trump shit, we can call him out on it. But I think there's this whole culture of just no matter what he does, even if you're speaking against peace, you go against Trump. And we talk about it in the likes of North and South Korea.
Right.
Can I elaborate, please?
Yeah. Well, for instance, we can even go back before that. We can go back to Syria, where he started making noises about, he tweeted something about we're pulling out of Syria, right? Yeah. All of a sudden you saw this new Assad gassing his own people. Now, this is the second time this happened. This also happened in 2014, which was the red line that was crossed that Obama had set out for us to enter the war in Syria, the civil war in Syria. Yeah. But Cy Hirsch did some great reporting on that. By the way, Cy Hirsch being a reporter who is banished to reporting from foreign publications.
Cy Hirsch is awesome.
Anytime you question the deep state, you lose your job, whether it's, Chris Hedges or Cy Hirsch or Phil Donahue or even Cenk, So Cy Hirsch reported that this was not Saddam gassing his own people. It was an attack, and there was some phosphates, some agricultural phosphates that blew up, and that's what it was perceived as. But we jumped on it, and we entered in there, and we ended up prolonging the war because we ended up supporting the Al-Nusra Front, who was the outgrowth of Al-Qaeda, right? So otherwise, Assad and Russia would have dispatched with ISIS and would have ended that war a lot sooner until we came in and supported. And then, of course, the White Helmets, which was the propaganda arm of the Al-Nusra Front, which everybody made and Max Blumenthal did a great 2-part series in Alternet about that, how they were really... they were brought up by the Purpose campaign, which is funded by Avaz, which is why I don't give to Avaz anymore. You go on their page, they had a no-fly zone in Libya, and then they had a no-fly zone in Iraq. And we know, Syria, and we know what no-fly zone means. It means war, exactly. Yeah. So Ayman Asfari, who owned a company called Petrofrac, you can tell it's a petroleum company, he was funding the White Helmets. And we fell for it hook, line, and sinker, to the point where I remember Claudia Bester, who runs public programs at the Hammer Museum, she was showing that thing. And I'm like, no, that's propaganda. You can't show that. But everybody is totally snowed. So Trump tweets that we're going to get out of Syria. And the next thing you know, all of a sudden there's this new Assad is gassing his own people. And that's when Trump tweets out dirty gas-killing animal, he calls Assad. And then bombs their airfield, okay? Yeah. So this is what the deep state does. And I use the term deep state knowing that it's been expropriated by the alt-right. I first heard it in 2014 on Bill Moyer's show, okay? And it was a show called Anatomy of the Deep State with Mike Lofgren, who'd written a book on it. And he was the one to say that the deep state is really the military-industrial intelligence complex backed by Wall Street that really runs things. And you can call it the permanent government if you want. But the fact of the matter is, anytime someone uses the word deep state, you're now all of a sudden considered to be alt-right. So this is what's happening in North Korea. The deep state wants to perpetuate, and I did a show about this in March, that everything we've been told about North Korea is wrong. He was actually a communist in the same way that Ho Chi Minh was a communist, that Mao Zedong was a communist. These were independent communist movements trying to free their people from the yoke of imperialism and the yoke of colonialism. So when Ho Chi Minh came to the United States to meet with Roosevelt, he wouldn't meet with him. So then, of course, Truman said that... the domino theory, because Truman was propped up. I don't know if you guys know this story, but if you watch Oliver Stone's Untold History of the United States, he talk about shenanigans at the Democratic National Convention in Roosevelt's last term. They pulled a fire alarm because Henry Wallace, who was the vice president, they elected the vice president separately then. Henry Wallace was winning, and he was very much the Bernie Sanders of his time.
It was a Bernie versus Trump.
Right. So they twisted arms overnight, pulled the fire alarm, cleared the convention, twisted arms, and then the next morning Harry Truman won. And he was the pawn of Allen Dulles, from the head of the CIA, and his brother John Foster Dulles, who basically came up with this whole domino theory that if we lose, Vietnam, well, actually, North Korea was before Vietnam. So when was Truman? He was 56, was this? No, he was before that.
It was in the 40s.
Yeah, that was the
late 40s.
Right. So obviously, North Korea was. I did my whole show on it, okay? And it was in March, and it was basically that everything we were told about the Kims, the first Kim, this is now the grandson Kim running thing, is wrong. And the reason they have all those nuclear weapons is to defend themselves, because if they didn't have a nuclear deterrent, then we would have dispensed with them a long time ago, the same way that we dispensed with Libya. So basically, South Korea is under the control of the United States. They never declared an end to that war. They want to have a peace treaty. They want to be one Korea. I went to a 4-hour teach-in on this at UCLA. Yeah. Abby Martin spoke at that.
Yeah. And how does Trump play a part in that?
Well, Trump plays a part in it because for his own egotistical reasons, because he does everything for egotistical reasons, he wants to achieve peace with North Korea. So as soon as he starts negotiating with North Korea or sends his people to negotiate with North Korea, people from the left and the right start attacking him because they want to perpetuate the status quo, because not only does it benefit the deep state, it also benefits the international arms dealers and the weapons manufacturers. So just recently, this article that you're posting was a response, and there's been two responses, one in The Nation by Tim Shorrock and one in The American Conservative by Gareth Porter, basically using the same word about this New York Times piece that by David Sanger, who is a reporter who should know better, was that it was deceptive.
Yeah.
That he didn't even look into what he was reporting about to say that these particular nuclear weapons that he's still building violate the treaty, because they're not even in the treaty. They're totally transparent. He should still be building them. Anyway, he's going to be on my show next week, so I'll be getting into this a little bit more with him. But basically, it's a case of, like you say, they're always piling on to make Trump look bad. So even when he does something good, like trying to establish peace with North Korea, even if it's for the wrong reasons, they've got to belittle it and try to sabotage it.
Yeah.
Right. It's the same thing as it's always been. The military-industrial complex and the deep state are in control. The presidents are just encouraged to follow what they do and what they say. And that's why you see a lot of these right-wingers starting to promote that. And the danger in that is that we need to understand nuance. We need to understand that these people are, like Alex Jones, are using that and then twisting the rest into something that's not true. But we need to be able to talk about the deep state because it's a reality, and it's not just happened with North Korea. It's happened with countries like Venezuela, countries in Central America. And right now we are living the results, and we are seeing the results of our imperialism in Central America come to a disastrous fruition, because those people that are in the caravans are escaping from these problems that we caused through our regime change wars. And in that way, we do so in every part of the world. And I think people need to start realizing that without, oh, you're a right wing, you're saying the same thing as Alex Jones. It's a little bit more complicated than that, you know. We need to be able to have these discussions, and North Korea is a prime example of that, because the moment they decide that they want to be independent is a moment where, like, no, this is not okay. It doesn't benefit us, so we don't want it.
Yeah, I was telling Pastor something he didn't know. I didn't know it until I went to this thing. The South Koreans can't even tell those tens of thousands of troops that are stationed there to leave. They don't even have control of their own country, because
the Americans are there.
Right, because only the Americans can pull out of there, and they don't want to pull out of there. You know?
I think that, and this comes back to Donald Trump, because we really didn't get to what he has done well in Syria. There was some pullout, whatnot, from the whole war, but he is still leaving some troops there, and I think that's also the part of thinking, like, you know, intellectually, when you can have some critical thinking and say, hey, listen, what Trump did, because he did tweet a lot of stuff, oh, we're wasting money, let them fight each other. We did pull out the majority of funding. We got the white helmets out of there. I think that's what the Putin-Trump discussion was the first time in Helsinki, was like, hey, get those white helmets out there. Let's get something. Let's start scaling down the war. We realized we couldn't win it anymore.
Yeah.
And then he pulled out the majority of the troops. There are still some troops in the Golan Heights, so he still he hasn't completely pulled out of Syria. But once again, it was a situation Trump could go to South Korea. Now, we have talked about that on this show, because you're looking over here at a Moon Jae-in man. I love Moon Jae-in, and the timing was just perfect for Donald Trump to make a peace deal, because now Moon Jae-in came into power, and decades ago he had talked about the pillars of peace within North Korea and whatnot. So I think it was this beautiful thing coming together. However, like you said, Trump has not pulled those troops. He's not going to pull those troops. And at one point, Kim Jong-un was really mad that they didn't cancel the drills. Right. Why? Because those drills cost us a lot of money, and we got to pay that money. Yeah. The military-industrial complex has got to get their money, their deep state. So it is this kind of like thing there, like, let's call balls and strikes. When Trump does something good, he's done something good to help broker the peace over there. However, let's also look what's going on. Those troops are still there, and they're not getting pulled out as well. So you can be critical of Trump in some ways, but you can also pat him on the back.
Well, I would rather not look at it that way. I would rather not pat him on the back for anything, because everything he's doing is for the wrong reasons. What I would rather do, and make the same point that you're making, is criticize his critics and say that they're criticizing him for the wrong reasons. They're actually siding.
That's fair.
Yeah, because I mean, you look at Rachel Maddow, I can't even watch her anymore. Because everything's about Trump and Russia, Mueller investigation. And now you notice Jimmy Dore did a great show on that, you know, based on an Aaron Mate tweet. Article, that there's no more mentioning of this anymore because they can't prove the collusion. But what did they do? They fomented a new Cold War with a country that is a second-rate power. It's GDP smaller than the size of Spain, a country that has nuclear weapons that we should be getting along with. And now Trump's doing a horrible thing by getting out of that nuclear agreement. Now he's saying it's because they're not living up to their portion of it, but that's not the right reason. Just because they do the wrong thing doesn't mean we should do the wrong thing. Somebody's got to stay in that agreement and set an example, because that's...
But they are doing their part too, but to talk about it as well. You talk about Iran, right?
No, I'm talking about Russia. The nuclear agreement,
Russia?
The nuclear agreement with Russia that we're getting out of.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, the Iran thing that he did was totally wrong.
Yeah.
So I don't really feel like we need... I mean, sometimes I feel sorry for him, because when he's sitting there and he's talking about fake news, I'm agreeing with him. It is fake news,
right,
but it's not that he's done something so great. You know, if he did it by accident or for the wrong reasons.
I think we need to recognize that the reasons he does things too is important, and all of the reasons he does things is for self-glory and narcissistic, desire. It's not because he actually cares. However, we do need to be like, this is actually good. When we see something good, we need to be aware of it. And the problem with the Trump deranged syndrome is all people focus on is him as the villain, while meanwhile we have all these other problems behind us and around us that are happening.
And we've also rehabilitated people that should not be rehabilitated, for instance.
Like Bush.
And also when I was covering the the Justice for Jail, the Justice LA thing that they were doing for that campaign with money bail, which totally got away from us. That's something that got completely bastardized at the last minute, to the point where all those groups took their name off of it. They'd rather see another year of cash bail than the predictive policing algorithms that they put in, that they feel are going to keep people in jail longer, actually, than the cash bail. But Jane Fonda was there speaking on behalf of that, and she actually caught herself as she was making a comment about how she was watching Rachel Maddow, and she said, and I found myself agreeing with the FBI. Can you imagine that? Me agreeing with the FBI, she says? And she wasn't even being self-critical, like, why are you agreeing with the FBI? Is somebody leading you down the primrose path here? Why do they even have the FBI person on there? They're on the payroll of MSNBC, CNN, all these spooks, these spies and former spies. They don't let you know that they're currently on the payroll of also the CIA, the FBI, the NSA as well. This guy, Malcolm Nance, is the worst.
Oh, my Lord. I can't stand Malcolm Nance.
I mean, and Karen Bass, I covered a town hall she did 2 years ago where she brings Malcolm Nance as the guest speaker. Karen Bass, who still calls herself a radical Marxist, by the way. She's
bringing Malcolm Nance?
Yeah, she's a split personality. The way she governs as a congresswoman is completely different than the way she still is. I had a private meeting with her with like 6 people. We were lobbying her about something. I can't remember what it is now. But, I mean, the way she was talking is like, oh, my God, She started out of the Rodney King riots. She started the Community Coalition. Anyway.
So, well, listen, Lauren Steiner, we've been here for a while. We have to start getting out right now. I think that's the last subject. Do you have anything else you want to ask, Mrs. Steiner?
A lot of people have been saying, Beto 2020. The man lost to Ted Cruz. He doesn't have the qualifications, in my opinion, to even be touted as president. And yet we have progressives online fighting because they want him to run. And he said he wasn't going to run. And now he's like saying he may or may not do it. And the reason this is such a huge issue to me is because it is my belief that the only person that can beat Donald Trump, and the belief of many other people who have like literally strategized and seen the numbers, is Bernie Sanders. And if we have a bunch of distractions running, and by the way, I don't trust Beto as a candidate. His background and his father's background, his dad was a corporate man who did a lot of damage to the Latino neighborhoods in Texas, and Sema Hernandez, who was running primary against Beto O'Rourke, was the actual progressive candidate. He got a lot more marketing, more public appeal, and so he won the primary. So I don't even trust him, and he backed away from Medicare for All. People are saying he didn't, but he absolutely did. And so my whole stance in this is, why are we pushing a candidate? It just seems like a bandwagon like thing. Oh, Beto 2020. I don't even have very much against him except what I've just mentioned. I just think it is a bad tactic and a bad strategy for progressives to all of a sudden be touting him as a candidate. The first time we did that was Obama. And well, one of the times we did that was Obama, and look where it got us.
Yeah,
look where it got us with a Hillary Clinton. Oh, it's that type of candidate. It's not going to happen, and I think it's just actually going to hinder us.
Well, I think he's more of an Obama than a Hillary Clinton because he's very charismatic.
Exactly.
Hillary Clinton is not at all charismatic. She's the opposite of charismatic. But he's also young. He also seemed to be able to bring a lot of people together. He ran a positive campaign. Mm-hmm. But the fact of the matter, he's also very wealthy, and we were trying to stay away from wealthy people. Yep. And his wife works for a charter school.
It's like the establishment's fishing for a candidate. It was like when they had the what was the speech? Excuse me, when Trump had when you do the yearly speech, help me out.
State of the Union?
State of the Union, they had Kennedy try to do the opposition speech against him. It's like, you're just trying to search for any, here's somebody with that name. They were trying to search for and that's what they're doing.
He's another one who doesn't support Medicare for all.
Yeah.
Kennedy,
100%.
Yeah. He's too much into big pharma. So.
Yeah, and I do agree that they're fishing. But he's also being courted by many, as quoted in this article, high-profile Democratic donors. I mean, he has to take... So he's being courted by these people, and they are willing to throw in money against him. And I feel like if they throw in money and he gets the establishment behind him, and he has a lot of progressives behind him, it's going to be another mistake.
See, that's why I think some sort of campaign finance piece of legislation has to be our order of business. Because what happens is our corporate free candidates were shut out because they didn't have the money. And as long as people like Eleni Kounalakis is allowed to put in, $4 million of her own money, $4.5 million of her father's money, and beat out someone like Gail, who is so much of a better candidate. She even beat out Ed Hernandez, who I ended up voting for Ed Hernandez. Not that I think he's so great, but I just was so offended that this woman could buy herself this lieutenant governor. She had no background. She was Obama's ambassador to Hungary simply because she was a big donor to him. Not that she had any background at all.
And now she's lieutenant governor.
Yeah. And now
that's how it works here.
Yeah. And I would like to see, we have an interview with Eleni Kounalakis from the San Diego DNC. We cornered her. Her campaign manager didn't want us to talk to her, but I jumped right in there.
You did?
I pulled the Lauren Steiner, and I said, are you progressive? That was my first question and whatnot, and she tried to answer it. You can see the... Well, and then here goes the platitude part and stuff.
Yeah, she ducked me. I actually, before I started live streaming, maybe I shouldn't have done this. I should have just started live streaming and cornered her. But before I started my live stream at the Santa Monica Dem Club Summer Picnic, I came to interview. I had 6 questions about banning fracking, free college, all these different things that I wanted her to, come on camera for. She said she wouldn't do it. She gave me her communications director's email address. She said she didn't have time. Meanwhile, she was just milling about. Every other candidate that was there talked to me, So...
She's
Fooey on her.
She knew who you were. It's kind of like, Lawrence, like I've seen so many campaign managers go, that's Lauren Steiner over there. Talking to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Oh, it's Lauren Steiner. I know you, Lauren. Everybody knows Lauren Steiner. So Eleni didn't want to answer any tough questions. So
and then when I shouted him out when she was speaking, she's saying, and I sit on the Coastal Commission. I'm going to make sure that Trump is not allowed to drill offshore. And I said, what about banning fracking? I shouted it out. And she goes, oh, we have a heckler. I'm like, no, not a heckler, just somebody who is a reporter who was trying to ask you a question that you didn't answer. Meanwhile, Jerry Brown is fracking on state waters. So he's making a big deal like, ooh, we're going to make sure Trump doesn't frack off in federal waters when he's already has got 5 times more wells in state waters that he's currently drilling in.
20,000 plus.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right, we got to do the lightning round. We're going to get this going. Me and Fee are going to ask you a couple questions. Are you ready? Lauren Steiner, what's your favorite bagel?
Oh, poppy seed.
Next question.
Lauren Steiner, what's your favorite ice cream?
Chocolate chip mint.
Ooh. Lauren Steiner, who's your favorite movie star?
Katharine Hepburn.
Who is your favorite progressive other than Bernie Sanders?
AOC.
If you could travel anywhere in the world today, where would you go?
Australia, New Zealand.
Who's your favorite Green Party personality?
I don't know. I don't like any of them.
All right, which Democrat do you despise the most?
Oh, Joe Manchin. Right now.
Last question.
Oh, which of the hosts of the Convo Couch is the prettiest?
I plead the fifth.
Ah! That's it. Hit the buzzer. Lauren Steiner, ladies and gentlemen.
That was definitely a
Thank you guys so much. It was really fun.
Tomorrow we're going to have on Graham Elwood right here on the Convo Couch, so tune on in.
And we'll be talking more about my experience visiting Tijuana and seeing the people from the caravans there. So,
Convo out.
bye.
Hey, if you liked our video and want to support independent media, please like, share, and subscribe below.
Yeah, we have a Facebook, a Twitter, a YouTube, and coming soon, fam, we're going to be on Roku.
Take it easy, fam. And if you have any change to spare, please subscribe to our Patreon below to keep us going.
Yes, anything would help with that.
Thanks again for watching. Convo out.